I was driving home from my son's apartment, the Seattle skyline a familiar glimmer in my rearview mirror, when my phone buzzed with a message from an unsaved number. The text was short and unsettling. "Don't forget to look around." A shiver of unease traced its way down my spine. "Is this a threat?" I typed back, my fingers fumbling on the screen. The reply was even more cryptic. "This is salvation." Before I share the rest of this story, I'd be so grateful if you would subscribe to the channel. And please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It's wonderful to know where my story is reaching. The calm of the evening was abruptly destroyed by a violent pounding on my front door. It sounded less like a knock, and more like an assault. 3 forceful, frantic blows that seemed to make the very frame of the house shudder. "Open this door, Mom. I know you're in there." Leo's voice, raw and strained, pierced through the heavy wood. It was pitched with a note of hysteria that made my stomach twist into a knot. I carefully placed my teacup back on its saucer, the delicate porcelain making a sharp clink that sounded unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. My reading glasses slid down my nose as I walked toward the entryway, a sense of foreboding washing over me. I knew a storm was waiting on my doorstep. The instant I turned the polished brass knob, Leo burst past me, uninvited. His expensive suit was a mess of wrinkles, and a sheen of sweat covered his brow, a stark contrast to the crisp coolness of the May evening. His hands were shaking as he raked them through his already disheveled hair, and his eyes darted around my living room like a cornered animal desperately seeking an escape. "Mom, I need 175, right now." The words spilled out of him in a frantic, breathless torrent. "It's a matter of life and death." I closed the door with a deliberate, measured calm, my eyes fixed on my 38-year-old son as he paced frantically across the polished hardwood floors. His breathing was ragged, his movements agitated and unpredictable. Life and death. I folded my arms across my chest, the familiar, heavy weight of disappointment settling in once again. "Leo, how many times have we been here before? How many times have I heard this same story? You don't get it?" He spun to face me, his features contorted with a mixture of panic and rage. "These people are not playing games." The antique mantel clock ticked on, its steady rhythm marking the passing seconds of the tense silence that had fallen between us. I studied my son's face, taking in the deep dark circles beneath his eyes, and the nervous clenching and unclenching of his jaw. This felt different from his usual gambling debts. This felt deeper, darker, and far more dangerous. "And neither am I," I replied, my voice even despite the frantic pounding of my own heart. "This has to stop. It's time for you to face reality." Leo's fist slammed down on the cherrywood dining table, with a sickening crack that echoed through the quiet house. The table, a piece my late husband Robert and I had chosen together, a family heirloom that had witnessed decades of holidays and celebrations, didn't so much as shudder. Leo, however, recoiled, cradling his hand, his knuckles already turning red. "You have no clue what you're doing," he hissed, his voice thick with pain and fury. "These aren't the kind of people you can just ignore." I moved across the room and settled into my favorite armchair, the worn leather sighing softly as it took my weight. From this vantage point, I had a clear view of Leo as he resumed his agitated pacing, his frantic footsteps creating a chaotic rhythm on the floor. "Then tell me about them, Leo," I said, my voice quiet but firm. He stopped, his back still to me. For a long moment, the only sounds in the room were the ticking of the clock and his own ragged breaths. When he finally turned to face me, his expression had changed. The panic was still there, but a colder, more calculating look had settled in its place. "Sal Costello and his people, they run things down in South Seattle. I borrowed from them to cover some other losses. And now you're in deeper than ever." I finished for him, the words carried on a sigh that felt like it came from the very depths of my soul. "Leo, I have been pulling you out of these messes for 20 years, and every single time, you swear it will be the last." He crossed the room and dropped to his knees beside my chair. For a fleeting instant, he looked like the little boy who used to climb into my lap, seeking comfort after a bad dream. But the illusion was shattered the moment our eyes met. There was no innocence in his gaze, only raw desperation and a thinly veiled attempt at manipulation. This time it's really different, Mom. They've given me until tomorrow night. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. They showed me pictures of what they do to people who don't pay up. The menace in his words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I searched his face, trying to find a glimmer of truth amidst the layers of fear and deceit. Outside, a dog barked once, a sharp sound in the quiet night. 175-0, I repeated, my voice low and measured. Where did it all go, Leo? His eyes darted away, unable to meet mine, fixing on some indistinct spot on the wall behind me. Poker. High-stakes games in back rooms. I was on a winning streak for weeks, Mom. I was this close to paying everything off. And then you lost it all. Plus more, I stated, the familiar heartbreaking pattern playing out once again. Leo's hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. You have no idea what it's like. The pressure, the thrill of it, the feeling when the cards turn your way. I'm good at this, Mom. I just need one more stake to... No. The word was sharper, harder than I had intended. I'm not doing it. In an instant, Leo's face transformed. The desperate, pleading mask vanished, replaced by something far more sinister. His eyes narrowed into slits, and his voice dripped with a venom I had never heard from him before. You were always selfish. You cared more about that company than you ever did about me. I remained perfectly still in my armchair, watching this monstrous stranger who had taken my son's face. The clock on the mantel continued its indifferent ticking, oblivious to the emotional tempest raging in my living room. I worked to build that company for you, Leo. For your future. My future? His laugh was a short, bitter bark. He started pacing again, his movements becoming more aggressive, his hands slicing through the air. You probably don't even remember my birthday. March 20, twund, I said without a moment's hesitation. And I remember every single gift I ever gave you that you either broke or sold for cash. The stark truth of my words stopped him in his tracks. A dark flush crept up his neck, and for a split second, a flicker of shame crossed his face before it was consumed by a fresh wave of anger. That's right. Throw it all back in my face. His voice rose to a shout. Every mistake I've ever made. You keep a running tally of all my faults, don't you? A little black book of every time I've disappointed you. He was a hurricane of rage, circling the room, bumping into the coffee table, and sending my newspaper sliding to the floor. The lamp on the end table teetered precariously as he stormed past, his movements growing more and more erratic. I keep a ledger of love, Leo, I said, my voice unwavering despite the chaos erupting around me. Every time I bailed you out, every debt I cleared, every single chance I gave you to turn your life around. Love? He spun back to face me, his eyes wild. You call that love? That's control. It's manipulation. The sheer irony of his accusation was staggering. Here was my son, who had just tried every manipulative trick in the book, from threats to feigned despair, accusing me of the very behavior he had perfected. I shifted in my chair, the leather groaning softly. Leo, please. Sit down. Let's just talk about this calmly. Calm? His voice cracked. There is nothing calm about having a target on your back. There is nothing calm about knowing that if I don't get them their money by tomorrow night, they'll... He trailed off, running his hands through his hair again, leaving it in even greater disarray. The sweat had now soaked through the collar of his shirt, despite the cool breeze drifting in through the open window. You're going to regret this, Mom. The words were spoken softly, but they carried a chilling threat that settled in the room, making the air feel heavy and dangerous. For the first time all evening, a genuine fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my disappointment. Leo's gaze fell upon the mantelpiece, where a collection of family photos stood in silver frames. His hand hovered over them before he selected a portrait of my late husband Robert, a young Leo, and me. It was taken at Pike Place Market. Robert's smile was wide and genuine. A little Leo was perched on his shoulders, and we were all squinting happily into the Sunday. With a horrifyingly deliberate slowness, he lifted the frame to his eye level. Maybe it's time you learned what real loss feels like. The frame didn't slip. He let it go. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, violent crack, and the glass shattered, a spiderweb of fractures spreading across our smiling faces. The sound seemed to linger in the air, impossibly long. For a moment, we both just stared at the ruined photograph. A long crack ran right through Robert's face, and the image of my little boy was broken into a dozen pieces. "Get out," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Leo straightened up, brushing non-existent dust from his wrinkled suit. The gesture was almost nonchalant, but I could see his hands were still trembling. "You'll change your mind," he said, walking toward the front door. "When you realize what you've let happen, you'll be begging to help me." "I won't." He paused in the doorway, his hand on the frame. For a heartbreaking second, I thought I saw a flicker of remorse, a shadow of the son I had raised. But then he smiled, a cold, empty expression that never reached his eyes. "We'll see." The door slammed shut behind him with a force that rattled the windows in their frames. The sudden, profound silence that followed felt heavy and oppressive. I stayed in my chair, listening as his footsteps faded down the walkway, followed by the roar of his car's engine as he sped away into the night. Only then did I rise and walk to the broken frame. Kneeling carefully, I began to gather the sharp pieces of glass, noting how the cracks had separated us all. The glass cut my finger, and a single drop of my blood fell onto Robert's fractured smile. I carried the broken memory with me as I moved through the house, turning off the lights Leo had left blazing in his destructive wake. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors, each one feeling heavy and measured. The house itself felt altered, tainted, as if his rage had left invisible scars on the walls. My study, however, greeted me with its familiar comfort. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were filled with books, their leather-bound spines glowing softly in the light of the brass desk lamp. Awards from Vance Innovations were displayed discreetly among family photos and mementos. This room was the culmination of 40 years of hard work, careful planning, and quiet success. I set the broken frame on my desk and poured myself a small glass of wine from the crystal decanter Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. The deep red liquid swirled in the glass, and I stared into it, as if the answers I desperately needed might be found in its depths. The wingback chair by the fireplace felt like an old friend as I sank into it. From here, I could see the things that had once defined my world: the photo albums, the filing cabinet with all our important documents, and the desk where I had made the decisions that built our family's security. "Robert, you always said I was too soft on him," I whispered to the cracked photograph, his fractured smile still managing to radiate warmth. If he were still here, he would have put a stop to this madness years ago. I opened a family album, the thick pages whispering as I turned them. There was Leo at 6, a huge gap-toothed grin on his face, standing proudly next to his first bicycle. At 12, sullen and defiant in his Little League uniform after he quit the team halfway through the season. At 16, posing next to the brand new car I'd bought him, the same car he'd wrecked 3 months later drag racing with his friends. Every photograph was a story of wasted potential, of endless second chances that were thrown away. But there were other records, tucked away behind these painful memories. I pulled out a thick manila folder labeled Leo Financials and spread its contents across the coffee table. Bank statements, canceled checks, loan receipts, the paper trail of 2 decades of my enablement. My hands moved with a grim purpose, the calculator clicking softly as I tallied the amounts. Car payments, tuition for colleges he'd dropped out of, legal fees, and countless gambling debts. The numbers climbed relentlessly. 20, 0, 50, 0, 85, 0, 137, 462. The final figure stared back at me from my notepad, written in my own steady hand. It was enough to buy a small house, enough to start a business, enough to provide a comfortable retirement for someone who had worked their entire life. I took a sip of wine, feeling the familiar burn in my throat. Outside, The neighborhood was settling into its nightly rhythm. I could hear the faint sound of a television's laugh track from a neighbor's house. Normal families, living normal lives, completely unaware that a woman next door was calculating the staggering cost of her own son's self-destruction. My gaze fell on my wedding photograph with Robert. We were so young, so full of dreams. He had been an architect, a man of logic and structure, practical and wise in ways I hadn't fully appreciated until he was gone. Even back then, he had worried about spoiling our future children. "Children need boundaries, Eleanor," he'd said one night, as we talked about starting a family. "Love without limits isn't love at all. It's just harm disguised as kindness." I'd thought he was being overly cautious at the time. Now, sitting amongst the stark evidence of my failures as a parent, his words felt chillingly prophetic. The fire crackled in the hearth, its flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. I remembered my own mother, a pragmatic woman who taught me the value of hard work, not with lectures, but by her own example. When I wanted a new dress for the school dance, I earned it by working weekends at the local diner. When I dented her car at 17, I paid for every penny of the repairs out of my own savings. "You taught me to be strong, Mom," I whispered to the dancing flames. What did I make of my son? The answer was there in the shattered photograph on my desk, in the folder overflowing with receipts, and in the chilling memory of Leo's cold, threatening smile. With a sense of grim finality, I gathered the financial records and slid them back into the folder. The family album followed. The memories would always be there, but the destructive pattern they represented had to end tonight. The mantel clock chimed 10, its deep, resonant tones echoing through the quiet house. I finished my wine, locked the manila folder in the bottom drawer of my desk, and turned the key. The soft click of the lock felt like a final, irrevocable decision. Whatever happened next, whatever threats Leo intended to make good on, I would not give in. He was a 38-year-old man. If he was ever going to learn about consequences, it would have to be now, in the most difficult way imaginable. The broken photograph caught the last of the firelight as I turned off the lamp and made my way upstairs, my heart heavy but my resolve firm. The quarterly reports on my desk were a meaningless blur of numbers and charts. 18 hours had passed since Leo's volatile exit, 18 hours of tossing and turning, haunted by the memory of his cold smile and the sickening sound of shattering glass. I had arrived at Vance Innovations at 9 o'clock sharp, hoping that the familiar, structured world of profit margins and market projections would distract me from the chaos of my personal life. The view from my corner office, which usually brought me a sense of peace, Puget Sound, stretching out to the horizon. The Seattle skyline, a testament to order and ambition, felt like a prison today. I straightened the intact family photograph on my desk, the one from that same day at Pike Place Market, a painful reminder of happier times. The contrast between that smiling family and the brokenness of last night made my chest ache. My assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, startling me. "Miss Vance, your son Leo is online too." The words seemed to hang in the air. I stared at the blinking red light on my phone, my hand hovering over the receiver, frozen. 10 seconds passed. 15. The light pulsed patiently, awaiting my decision. Finally, with a deep sigh, I picked up the receiver, bracing myself for another onslaught. "Hello, Leo. Mom, I wanted to apologize for last night. I was completely out of line." The voice on the other end was almost unrecognizable. It was soft, hesitant, and utterly devoid of the venomous rage from the night before. I gripped the phone tighter, my mind racing, trying to find the hidden angle, the trap I was sure was there. "This is unexpected, Leo. Chloe helped me see. She reminded me of everything you've done for me over the years." His tone was filled with what sounded like genuine remorse, or at least a masterful performance of it. I let my fear get the best of me, and I said things I can never take back. "Please, will you let me make it up to you? Come to dinner tonight?" Before I could even process it, I found myself writing, "Dinner at Leo's, 7 p.m., on my desk calendar. The pen felt strangely heavy in my hand as I watched the words form. "All right," I heard myself say. "What time? 7? And Mom? There was a pause, filled with what sounded like a genuine catch in his voice. I am so sorry. The line went dead. I was left staring at the phone, completely bewildered. My son, who less than 24 hours ago had threatened me in my own home, was now extending a dinner invitation filled with humility and apologies. I leaned back in my chair, watching the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the meaningless reports on my desk. Either Leo had experienced some kind of miraculous, overnight epiphany, or this was the most elaborate and sophisticated manipulation he had ever attempted. Far below, the city traffic hummed along, a steady, predictable rhythm in a world that suddenly felt anything but. My family was teetering on the brink of something, and I had no idea what it was. I touched the intact photograph again, studying the face of the young, innocent boy Leo had once been, before gambling had etched lines of desperation around his eyes, before money had become the only language he truly understood. My business instincts, sharpened by 4 decades of high-stakes negotiations, were screaming that this was a trap. But beneath the exhaustion and the anger, a tiny, treacherous flicker of hope ignited. The hope that my son had finally hit rock bottom and was ready, at last, to start climbing his way back up. I glanced at my watch. 5 hours until dinner. 5 hours to decide if I was walking into a heartfelt reconciliation or a meticulously set trap. The afternoon stretched before me like a giant question mark, and the answer was waiting for me in Capitol Hill. The drive home through the evening rush hour gave me far too much time to think. I scanned through radio stations, searching for a distraction, finally settling on a classical station whose somber tones matched my mood. By the time I pulled into my driveway in Medina, the seed of doubt planted by Leo's call had grown into a certainty. Something was profoundly wrong. In my bedroom, surrounded by the comforting order of my life suits arranged by color, my late husband Robert's photo smiling at me from the nightstand, I felt a growing unease. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie for the 3rd time, my own uncertainty reflected in my eyes. The navy blue suit I'd chosen felt appropriate, respectful of the invitation, but not so formal as to seem like I was trying too hard. Methodically, I checked the contents of my wallet: credit cards, cash, business cards. My phone was fully charged. Each action was precise, a habit learned from years of preparing for every possible business contingency. In my study, I hesitated, then picked up the phone. Robert's voice echoed in my memory. Trust but verify, Eleanor. Hope for the best, but always prepare for the worst. I dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the 2nd ring. Marcus Thorne. Marcus, it's Eleanor. If you don't hear from me by midnight, I need you to check on me at Leo's apartment. I kept my voice steady, matter of fact. 1247 North Winchester, apartment 3B. There was a brief pause. Eleanor, do you want to tell me what's going on? It's probably nothing, I said, trying to sound convincing. Just humor and old woman's paranoia. You got it. Be careful, Eleanor. After hanging up, I did one last sweep of the house, checking the locks with a diligence that was unusual for me. I armed the security system and left a note for my housekeeper with my destination. Each step was deliberate, calculated, as if I were preparing for a hostile takeover rather than a family dinner. As I passed through the living room, my eyes were drawn to the broken photograph from the night before. Robert's face, split in two by the shattered glass, seemed to be watching me with concern. I gently touched the frame, his warnings about my softness toward Leo ringing in my ears. Maybe you were right all along, my love, I whispered. Outside, my Lexus sat waiting in the driveway. I'd chosen it over the Porsche, a more modest choice for what I hoped, against all odds, would be a humble evening. The keys felt cold in my hand as I slid behind the wheel. For a long moment, I just sat there, the engine off, watching the sun dip below the horizon. All around me, normal families were settling in for the night. When had my life become so complicated that a simple dinner with my son required a contingency plan? I thought again of Leo's voice on the phone, that unfamiliar note of humility. Was it possible? Could a person change so completely in less than a day? My years of business experience screamed no, but a mother's heart whispered a desperate, hopeful maybe. The engine turned over with a quiet purr, and I backed out of the driveway, a strange feeling settling over me that this was not just a drive across town, but a journey toward a truth I might not be ready to face. Capitol Hill was 35 minutes away. 35 minutes to find out if I was about to salvage my relationship with my son, or walk straight into his trap. The converted brownstone on North Winchester had a weary look about it, its brick facade worn down by years of Seattle rain and general neglect. I parked my car across the street, taking a moment to observe the neighborhood. It was a place in transition, with signs of urban decay clashing with the encroaching gentrification of young professionals. Leo met me at the door with a hug that felt both too tight and too long. "Mom, thank you so much for coming. This means the world to me." The performance started immediately. His smile was perfectly calibrated, warm and welcoming, but not overly eager. "Chloe's been in the kitchen all afternoon," he said, guiding me into a small living room filled with mismatched furniture. "She's so excited to see you." Chloe emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Her smile was bright, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a visible strain around the edges. "Eleanor, welcome. I hope you're hungry." The apartment was a testament to their financial struggles. The carpet was worn thin, the coffee table was covered in water rings, and a stack of bills on a side table revealed several with bright red, overdue notices. But the space was spotlessly clean, and Chloe had made an effort with a few potted plants and some family photos. Throughout dinner, Leo's performance was flawless. "Mom, I've made a decision. I'm done with gambling. For good," he announced, his expression earnest. "I know how much pain I've caused you, and I want to spend the rest of my life making it right." "That's wonderful news, Leo," I said, watching him closely, noticing the subtle way his eyes didn't quite align with the conviction in his words. "What brought about this sudden change?" "Seeing you last night, realizing what I was putting you through. Chloe helped me see that I was on the verge of losing everything that truly matters." Just then, Chloe's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, and a flicker of panic crossed her face before she quickly masked it. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a little too high. "I just need to check this." "Is everything all right, Chloe? You seem a little on edge." "Oh no, it's just work," she said with a quick, unconvincing laugh. "The principal wants us to review our lesson plans for next week." But her hand trembled slightly as she put the phone down, and I couldn't help but notice it was the 7th message she'd received since I arrived. For a teacher on a Tuesday night, that seemed unusually high. Leo quickly filled the silence with more stories of his supposed epiphany, each one sounding more rehearsed than the last. He asked about my business with a newfound interest and inquired about my health with an exaggerated level of concern. "Remember that time we went hiking at Mount Rainier?" he said, refilling my wine glass. "You taught me about patience that day." I remembered that trip very differently. I remembered Leo complaining about waking up early, giving up on the trail after less than an hour, and spending the rest of the day sulking in the lodge. But I just nodded and smiled, playing my part in this bizarre production. As the evening wore on, Chloe grew visibly more agitated. She dropped her fork twice, and jumped every time her phone buzzed. When she excused herself to go to the kitchen, I could hear the faint sound of a whispered, frantic conversation. "She's just stressed about work," Leo explained, though I saw his jaw tighten. "Budget cuts at the school. You know how it island?" While he talked, my eyes scanned the apartment, picking up on the details that told the real story. I saw a handful of poker chips in a drawer he'd left slightly ajar. A lineup of empty wine bottles by the back door, far more than 2 people would normally accumulate in a short time. A notice for a canceled gym membership on the counter. "The meal is delicious, Chloe," I said truthfully, as she returned to the table. She had made an herb-crusted salmon that was exceptional. "You're very lucky to have her, Leo." For a split second, his smile faltered. "Yes, she's very supportive." Chloe's wedding ring caught the light as she nervously twisted it on her finger. It was a constant, anxious habit that spoke volumes. Eleanor, she said suddenly, her voice strained. How do you help someone when you know they're in real danger? Leo's fork froze midair. Honey, what a strange question. Oh, I was just thinking about that news story. She backpedaled quickly. The one about the missing hiker. But her eyes met mine for a brief, intense moment. And in that fleeting glance, I saw it all. Genuine, gut-wrenching fear, and a desperate, silent plea for help. I finished my wine and placed the glass on the table with a quiet finality. Thank you both for a lovely evening, but I really should be getting home. As I stood up to leave, a cold, heavy certainty settled in my stomach. Something was terribly, horribly wrong here. And whatever it was, Chloe knew everything. The cool evening air felt like a welcome relief as I walked down the steps of Leo's building. I needed time to think, to piece together the unsettling performance I had just witnessed. Instead of heading to my car, I decided to walk for a while, letting the rhythm of the city clear my head. Capitol Hill was alive with its usual Tuesday night energy, a stark contrast to the tense, suffocating atmosphere in my son's apartment. This was the vibrant, successful world my son could have been a part of, if only he had made different choices. I pulled my jacket tighter and started walking toward the quieter residential streets. My mind was in overdrive, cataloging every inconsistency from the evening: Chloe's frantic phone checking, Leo's overly polished stories of redemption, the poker chips I'd seen in the kitchen. 40 years of sizing up people and situations in the business world were all screaming the same thing. I had just walked out of a lie. The bustling commercial streets soon gave way to darker, tree-lined avenues. At 9:47 p.m., about 15 minutes into my walk, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I stopped under a street lamp and looked at the screen. It was another message from the same unknown number. Don't forget to look around you. I stared at the words, my heart starting to beat a little faster. Is this a threat? I typed back. The reply was instantaneous. This is rescue. A chill ran down my spine. I tried calling the number, but an automated voice informed me it was no longer in service. A lifetime of business had taught me the importance of documentation. I took a screenshot of the messages before putting the phone back in my jacket pocket, making sure it was easily accessible. The next few blocks felt different. The normal city sounds seemed amplified: my own footsteps on the pavement, the distant drone of traffic. I found myself looking over my shoulder, telling myself it was just paranoia brought on by the strange dinner and the cryptic texts. And then I saw the car. A black sedan, moving much slower than the flow of traffic, keeping a consistent distance behind me. I crossed the street, and it crossed too. I turned down a side street, testing my suspicion, and its headlights swung around the corner after me, cutting through the darkness like the eyes of a predator. My heart rate kicked up a notch. Robert's words echoed in my mind. Trust your instincts, Eleanor. They've kept you safe in business. They'll keep you safe everywhere else. The sedan crept closer, its engine a low, menacing purr. I could just make out the silhouettes of two people in the front seats. My pace quickened. The residential streets ahead were dark and empty. I was alone, exposed, with whatever was in that car. I made another sharp turn onto an even darker street, my heels clicking rapidly on the pavement. The car followed without hesitation. This was no longer a coincidence. I was being hunted. The sedan suddenly accelerated. I broke into a clumsy run, my 65-year-old body protesting. Behind me, I heard two car doors slam shut. Stop right there, lady. We just want to talk. The voice was rough, authoritative. Police. Help. I yelled, my voice swallowed by the empty street. No lights came on. No curtains moved. Shut her up and get her. A second younger voice yelled. Heavy footsteps pounded on the pavement behind me, closing the distance fast. I ducked into a narrow alley between two houses, weaving between trash cans and parked cars, my lungs burning. My doctor's warnings about stress and overexertion flashed through my mind, but stopping was not an option. The alley opened onto a dark, industrial street, lined with loading docks and old storage buildings. I pressed myself into the shadows of a brick wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. Where'd the old woman go? She couldn't have gone far. Split up. You check that way, I'll take this side. Their coordinated movements told me this wasn't a random mugging. These were professionals, and they were after me specifically. My eyes landed on an old storage building, its door slightly ajar. With their voices getting closer, I made a desperate dash across the open space and slipped inside, pulling the heavy door closed behind me. The building smelled of dust, motor oil, and decay. I found cover behind a large stack of wooden crates, fighting to quiet my ragged breathing as flashlight beams sliced through the grimy windows. Sweeping the alley just outside, my pursuers were prepared. Someone had planned this. Someone who knew I would be here. One of them rattled the door to the shed. I held my breath, pressing myself deeper into the darkness. Check in there. Nah. It's locked up tight. She's probably halfway to Medina by now. Their voices faded as they moved on, but I didn't move a muscle. Robert had always said my patience was my greatest asset in business. Tonight, it might just save my life. After a few minutes, I heard car doors slam and an engine start. I waited another 15 minutes, my mind reeling, before I finally allowed myself to breathe. This wasn't random. Someone had sent those men for me. Crouched in the dusty darkness of the storage shed, I listened as my heartbeat slowly returned to a less frantic rhythm. Through the dirty window pane, I could still see the sweeping beams of their flashlights. Where did that old woman disappear to? The first voice grumbled, laced with professional irritation. Maybe she managed to hide somewhere. The second, younger voice replied, sounding less certain. I shifted behind the crates, trying to get into a better position to hear. My elbow brushed against a metal paint can, creating a soft scraping sound that seemed to echo in the silence. The flashlights froze. For a terrifyingly long half-minute, the only sound was the frantic pounding in my ears. Leo won't pay us for nothing. We need to find her. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Leo. My son. The boy I had raised, nurtured, and endlessly forgiven had hired these thugs to hunt me down in the dark. The dinner invitation, the phony apologies, Chloe's terrified demeanor, it was all a grotesque stage play. A setup to get me here, alone and vulnerable. Forget it, the first voice said. She's already scared. We'll get her tomorrow. I pressed my hands over my mouth to stifle a sob as the full, monstrous reality of my son's betrayal washed over me. The boss just said to scare her, right? Make her think twice about refusing to help out her family. Yeah, but if we don't find her, how does he know we scared her? Their voices grew fainter as they moved away, but I remained frozen, the casual cruelty of their words echoing in my mind. They were discussing my fear as if it were a product to be delivered. After a few minutes, I heard their car doors slam and the sound of the engine fading into the distance. I waited another 15 agonizing minutes before I dared to move. My son, the baby Robert and I had adored, the young man I had never given up on, had crossed a line. He had transformed from a troubled son into a genuine threat. When I finally stepped out of the shed, the night air felt colder. In the distance, the city hummed on, indifferent. Chloe's cryptic warning suddenly made perfect, horrifying sense. She knew about Leo's plan. She had risked her own safety to send me that anonymous text, her conscience unable to bear the weight of her husband's monstrous plot. My first instinct was to call Marcus, to get the police involved, to document everything before Leo had a chance to spin a web of lies. But first, I needed to get somewhere safe, somewhere public. The 24-hour diner I had passed earlier beckoned like a beacon in the darkness, its warm neon glow promising coffee, light, and witnesses. As I walked toward it, I realized that my son had succeeded in one thing tonight. He had scared me more than I had ever been scared in my life, but not in the way he had intended. Inside the fluorescent glare of a 24-hour convenience store, my hands were shaking so badly that I dropped the quarter twice before I could finally get it into the payphone slot and dial 911. My own phone's battery had died somewhere during the chase. The young man behind the bulletproof glass watched me with detached curiosity. 911. What is your emergency? I need to report an attempted assault. 2 men chased me through the alleys near Capitol Hill. I need to speak with Detective Marcus Thorne at the 18th precinct. Ma'am, are you injured? The operator asked, her voice calm and professional. No, I'm safe now, but Detective Thorne is expecting to hear from me. Please tell him it's Eleanor Vance. 20 minutes later, Marcus's unmarked car pulled quietly into the parking lot. I watched him get out, his tall, solid presence a comforting sight. Eleanor, he said, his eyes taking in my disheveled state and torn jacket. What in God's name happened? The relief of seeing a trusted friend was so overwhelming I almost broke down. Marcus, I said, my voice trembling. I think my son is trying to kill me. We sat in his car, as I recounted every detail, the dinner, Chloe's palpable fear, the warning text, and the black sedan that had hunted me through the streets. Marcus took meticulous notes, his questions sharp and specific. You're sure you heard them say his name? I'm positive. One of them said, Leo won't pay us for nothing. We need to find her. They were hired, Marcus. My own son paid them to terrorize me. Marcus took a photo of the warning text on my phone just before the screen went black. We need to get you to the station to make a formal statement. Can you describe the car? Black sedan. Maybe a Honda Accord. Washington plates. I only caught the first few letters. There was a small dent on the rear passenger side door. Within minutes, Marcus had put out a bolo alert. The methodical efficiency of police work was a stark contrast to the terror and chaos I had just endured. At the 18th precinct, the station was humming with the usual late-night activity. As I gave my formal statement, my business mind appreciated the process: evidence collection, witness interviews, coordination, but underneath it all, a cold fury burned at the calculated nature of Leo's betrayal. Eleanor, that's a hell of an accusation, Marcus said, his expression grim. Are you absolutely certain? I met his gaze without flinching. One of them said Leo's name. He hired them. Just then, the radio on his desk crackled to life. Detective Thorne, we have a vehicle matching the bolo parked outside an apartment building on Beacon Hill. Marcus grabbed his jacket. Eleanor, stay here. We may have them. From the station, I listened to the radio chatter as backup units converged on the location. Unit 47. Confirm plate matches witness description. Affirmative, detective. Washington Bravo, Lincoln, 7219. Vehicle is cold. Suspects likely inside. The arrests were swift. Marco Rossi and Ricky Gallo, ages 32 and 29, were taken into custody without incident. Both had priors for assault and intimidation, hired muscle. Exactly the kind of people Leo would find through his gambling circles. Marcus separated them for interrogation. Marco broke first. A short while later, Marcus came back to the office where I was waiting. Eleanor, we've got them, and we have a full confession. I looked up from the lukewarm coffee I'd been nursing. What did he say? Marcus read from his notepad, his voice tight with disgust. Leo Wells paid us $50 to scare the old woman. Half up front, half when it was done. They were supposed to make it look like a random street crime. Scare me? Marcus? They were hunting me. His expression grew even darker. There's more. Leo told them you have a heart condition. He told them that a severe enough scare could finish the job for them, without them ever having to lay a hand on you. The air left my lungs. I sank heavily into the hard plastic chair, feeling every one of my 65 years. My son hadn't just hired criminals to threaten me. He had weaponized my own body against me, using private medical information to orchestrate what would have looked like a tragic, natural death. He knew about my arrhythmia, I whispered. I told him last Christmas my doctor was concerned. Rossi's phone has text messages from Leo arranging the whole thing. Bank records will show the payment. We have more than enough to arrest him for solicitation of assault and likely attempted murder. Ricky Gallo's story corroborated every detail. They described meeting Leo at a coffee shop near his apartment, where he gave them my photo, my address, and specific instructions to use my heart condition to their advantage. The plan was insidious, Marcus said, looking over their statements. Scare you enough to trigger a fatal heart attack, then vanish. No witnesses, no murder weapon, just an elderly woman who died of fright. The evidence piled up with chilling precision: text messages, surveillance footage of their meeting, bank transfers. My son had been devious, but he hadn't been careful. He's at his apartment right now, Marcus said, preparing the arrest warrant. Probably sleeping soundly, thinking his plan is in motion. I asked to be there when they arrested him. Marcus insisted I stay in a squad car a safe distance away, but I had to see it. I needed to see my son's face when he realized his meticulously planned murder plot had unraveled. Marcus, I asked, looking at the confession on his desk, for something like this, trying to kill your own mother, how long would he go to prison? With the premeditation, the financial motive? 15 to 20 years. Minimum. As his team prepared to leave, I sat alone in the humming police station. My son, the baby I once rocked to sleep, had calculated the exact amount of terror required to stop my heart. The sheer magnitude of that betrayal was a cold, heavy weight that threatened to crush me. Dawn was breaking as I dozed in a chair in a quiet corner of the detective's unit. At 8 o'clock sharp, Marcus returned with fresh coffee and the news that would finally close this horrific chapter of my life. Leo's in custody. We arrested him at his apartment at 6:30 this morning, no incident. I sat up, my muscles aching from the long, terrible night. How did he react? Total shock, Marcus said, organizing the paperwork on his desk. He denied everything, right up until we showed him Marco Rossi's signed confession and the bank statements. Then he just crumbled, admitted to the whole thing. My phone, which had been charging overnight, buzzed with a text. It was from the unknown number that had saved me. I had almost forgotten. I typed slowly, my fingers still unsteady. Thank you for saving my life. May I ask who this is? The reply came almost instantly. It's Chloe. I couldn't let him do it. You're a good woman, Eleanor. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a pang of sorrow for her. Why didn't you tell me? I was so scared of him. But when I realized he was actually going through with it, I'm so sorry. In a series of messages, she explained everything. She had overheard Leo on the phone the day before my visit, and, torn between fear and her own conscience, had bought a burner phone to send me the anonymous warning. She was already filing for divorce and had agreed to testify against Leo in exchange for immunity. She saved your life, Eleanor, Marcus said, reading over my shoulder. That warning made you aware. It's why you ran. I knew the legal process would be straightforward. With 2 confessions, bank records, text messages, and Chloe's testimony, the case against Leo was airtight. I need to see him, I told Marcus. One last time. The meeting took place in a sterile interview room. Leo sat at a metal table in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed. He looked small, pathetic, and utterly broken. Mom, I was desperate, he began, his voice cracking. Those people were going to. You made a choice, Leo, I said, my own voice cold and steady, the voice I used for business. I gave you everything a person could ask for, and you chose to try and kill me for it. It wasn't supposed to be like that. Just enough to scare you, to make you realize, to make my heart stop. I finished for him, the words like ice, using information I trusted you with. I stood up, the legs of the chair scraping against the concrete floor. You are no longer my son. Later that morning, I called my lawyer and began the process of rewriting my will. Leo's name was to be completely removed. His inheritance would be redirected to various charities and to a trust fund for Chloe. In one anonymous text message, she had shown more courage and decency than Leo had in his entire life. Back in my study, I looked at the collection of family photos. I knew I would have to put many of them away. Robert had been right all along. He had seen the darkness in Leo that my love had blinded me to. The broken photograph from that first terrible night was still on my desk. I picked it up, the fractured glass glinting in the morning sun, and placed it carefully into the trash can. Along with it, I threw away the last lingering illusion I had about the son I thought I knew. Justice would take its course. Leo would pay for his choices. And Chloe, I hoped, would find a way to build a new life, free from the poison that had almost destroyed us all. For the first time in 2 decades, I could think about my own future without the constant, looming dread of what crisis my son would manufacture next. Vance Innovations would thrive under new leadership, and my legacy would be one of charity and strength. And I could finally live my life without constantly looking over my shoulder. Sometimes, the hardest decisions are the only ones that can bring you peace. Cutting toxic people out of your life, even when they are your own family, is not an act of cruelty, but an act of survival. If this story resonated with you, I would be so grateful if you would like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. To hear the next story, please click on the video to your left. Thank you for listening.